On Christmas morning, in front of 11 family members, my daughter-in-law threw my coat at my feet, told me I had ruined her holiday, and ordered me out of the house I had purchased for cash 17 years ago. My son stood 4 feet away and said nothing. I counted his silence. 14 seconds. I stood there and counted every single one, and by the time the 14th second passed, I had already decided exactly what I was going to do. My name is Dorothy Mae Collins. I am 66 years old. I taught school for 35 years at Jefferson Elementary in Houston's 3rd Ward, and before that I raised 2 children alone after my husband Raymond passed from a heart attack when my son was 9 and my daughter was 6. I did not cry at Raymond's funeral. I cried at home, in the bathroom, with the faucet running so the children couldn't hear me. Then I dried my face, went back out to the living room, and got to work. That is the kind of woman I am. And on Christmas morning, standing in the foyer of that house on Sycamore Ridge Drive with my coat at my feet and my son's silence ringing in my ears, I was still that same woman. Let me take you back to the night before, because you need to understand how we got there. It was Christmas Eve, and I had driven 40 minutes from my apartment in Midtown to my son's house in Sugar Land with a car full of gifts and 2 pans of my mother's cornbread dressing that I had been making every December for 40 years. Raymond's mother had taught me the recipe. I could make it in my sleep. My son had called me 3 times that week, asking if I was bringing it. He said his wife's family was coming and he wanted to impress them. I made 2 full pans. I ironed my good blouse. I drove 40 minutes in Christmas Eve traffic because that is what mothers do. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, opened the door. She was 32. Beautiful, in the way that expensive things are beautiful. All sharp edges and careful maintenance. She wore a cream silk blouse, and her hair was blown out perfectly. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, like I was something that had arrived at the wrong address. "Oh," she said, "you're early." I was not early. I was exactly on time. She took the cornbread dressing without saying thank you and walked back toward the kitchen. I carried my own bags inside. The house was full of her family. Her mother, a woman named Claudette, who wore her hair in a silver updo and laughed too loud at things that weren't funny. Her sister, her sister's husband, 3 cousins I had met once before and couldn't place. My son was in the living room holding a glass of bourbon, laughing with Claudette's husband about something on the television. He saw me come in and waved, the kind of wave you give someone across a parking lot. He didn't get up. My granddaughter, Imani, was 8 years old, and the reason I made that drive every time, she came running from the back of the house in her pajamas, her braids flying, and threw herself at me with both arms. That one moment was worth every minute of the drive. "Grandma," she said into my shoulder, "I saved you a seat at the table. I love you, baby," I told her. "I love you more than every star in the sky." We sat down to dinner around 7. I had brought gifts for everyone, including a cashmere scarf for Claudette that I had spent more than I should have. The table was set with the china I had given my son when he got married, 12 place settings of Wedgwood that had belonged to Raymond's mother. Vanessa had not mentioned that. She told her family she had found it at an estate sale. I heard that. I let it go. Dinner was tense in the way that certain dinners are tense when everyone can feel the pressure building beneath the surface, but nobody wants to be the first one to name it. Vanessa spoke over me twice when I was mid-sentence. She corrected something I said about Imani's school to her own mother, as if I hadn't been the one who attended every parent-teacher conference for the past 3 years. My son refilled his bourbon and said nothing. After dinner, after Imani had been sent upstairs to bed, after Claudette's family had settled into the living room with their dessert, Vanessa said she needed to talk to me privately. My son followed us into the kitchen and closed the door. What I need you to understand is that the house on Sycamore Ridge Drive was not my son's house. It was never his house. I had purchased it in 2007 for cash. $480,000. Money I had saved across 3 decades of teaching double sessions, tutoring after school, running summer programs. I had placed it in the Collins Family Trust, with my son listed as a conditional occupant. He paid me $800 a month, which he called rent, and I called a reminder that nothing in this life is free. The deed was mine. The trust was mine. Every structural repair, every property tax bill, every insurance premium had come from my account. My son knew this. Vanessa knew this. In the kitchen, Vanessa sat down at the table like she was conducting a meeting. My son stood behind her with his arms crossed. "We need you to sign the house over to Marcus," she said. Her voice was pleasant, the way a woman's voice is pleasant when she has rehearsed what she wants to say. "We've been talking to a financial advisor, and it doesn't make sense for the asset to remain in your name at your age." "At my age?" I repeated. "If something happens to you, the trust goes through probate. It's complicated." "Your investment," I said. She smiled. "You know what I mean." I looked at my son. He was staring at the floor. "Marcus," I said, "look at me." He looked up. He had Raymond's eyes, warm brown, gentle, Raymond's eyes in a face that had forgotten how to be gentle. "Is this what you want?" I asked him. "To put your mother out of her own home?" "It's not putting you out," he said quickly. "You live in Midtown. This is our primary residence. It just makes sense legally." "It makes sense," I said. Vanessa leaned forward. "Dorothy, I think you're being emotional about this." I want you to notice that she called me Dorothy, not Miss Collins, not Mama, not even Miss Dorothy, the way Southern manners would demand. Just Dorothy. Flat. Like she was talking to a coworker she barely respected. I stood up from the table. "I'll think about it," I said. I went to get my coat from the front closet. I was going to drive home and think clearly and decide what I wanted to do next. I was going to sleep on it. I was going to be calm. But Vanessa followed me into the foyer, and Claudette was right there in the hallway. And Vanessa's voice shifted into something I had never heard from her before, something that had been waiting underneath the politeness for years. "You have been holding this house over our heads since the day we got married," she said. "You think because you paid for it, you own us. You think you can walk in here whenever you want, undermine me in front of my own family, and we're just supposed to be grateful. I am done being grateful, Dorothy. I want you to sign that house over by the 1st of the year, or I am filing for legal separation, and Marcus is going to take you to court for the property. We have a lawyer." I looked at my son. He said nothing. 14 seconds. I picked up my coat from where she had thrown it. "Merry Christmas," I said, and I walked out. I drove home in the dark. The highway was nearly empty at that hour, most of Houston already inside and warm. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in silence, and I thought clearly, the way I had taught myself to think in every crisis, over 35 years of managing a classroom full of other people's children. I broke the problem into parts. I looked at each part without panic, and by the time I pulled into my parking garage, I was not angry anymore. I was decided. I went upstairs to my apartment and made a cup of chamomile tea. I sat at the kitchen table where Raymond and I used to do the bills on Sunday mornings. The same table I had kept through 3 moves in 40 years. And I made a list. The first call I made the next morning, Christmas Day, was to my attorney. His name was Calvin Reese. He had been Raymond's college roommate, and he had drafted the Collins Family Trust himself. He picked up on the second ring because he knew my number and he knew I didn't call on holidays unless something had happened. I told him everything. When I was finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dorothy, you know what Clause 7 says." "I know what Clause 7 says, Calvin." I wrote it. Clause 7 was the trust's removal provision. If the conditional occupant threatened or took any legal action against the trustee had the right to list the property for immediate sale. My son had just told me, through his wife, that he was prepared to take me to court. That was a threat. That was exactly what Clause 7 was written for. "Calvin," I said, "I want to sell the house. The market is strong in Sugar Land," he said. "If you list it properly, you could get close to $900,000. "I don't want to list it properly," I said. "I want it sold in 72 hours. He paused. "That's going to cost you." "How much?" "You'll probably land around 650. Maybe 700 if we find the right cash buyer." I thought about that. I had paid $480,000 17 years ago. Even at $650, I was clearing a significant profit. I did not care about the number. Find the buyer, Calvin. There's something else, he said. His voice changed. Went careful. Before we proceed, I need to tell you something I found when I was reviewing your accounts last month. I had flagged it and I was going to call you after the new year. But given the circumstances, he told me that over the past 2 years, a series of withdrawals had been made from my secondary savings account. The one I kept at a different bank from my primary, the account I had set up years ago for Imani's education fund. I contributed $500 a month, automatically. I had not looked at the balance in some time, because I had not needed to. He told me the balance was not what it should have been, not by a significant margin. How much is missing? I asked. Approximately $41,000, Calvin said. Withdrawn in increments between $200 and $800. Always on weekdays, always in the morning, always from ATMs in Sugarland. Sugarland. I set down my teacup. Vanessa had been on my account for 2 years. I had added her in 2022 when Imani was sick, and I needed someone to be able to access funds for medical expenses in case I was unreachable. I had trusted her with that access, and for 2 years, in increments small enough not to trigger any alert, she had been helping herself to my granddaughter's education money. I sat very still for a long time. Calvin, I said, who do we call about identity theft? I called my daughter next. Her name is Patricia, and she lives in Memphis, and she is nothing like her brother. She is practical and honest, and when I told her what had happened, she did not say, I'm sorry or that's terrible. She said, what do you need me to do? I told her to drive down on the 28th and bring her husband James, who had worked in property management for 20 years and knew how to coordinate fast turnovers. She didn't ask questions. She said we'll be there by noon. I spent Christmas afternoon going through my financial records. Every statement I could access, every transaction, every automatic payment I made on my son's behalf. I kept careful records because I was a teacher for 35 years, and teachers keep careful records. The list was longer than I expected. Property taxes on the Sycamore Ridge house, $18,000 a year, paid from my account. Homeowner's insurance, $3,200 annually. The BMW my son drove. Lease payments of $640 a month, paid from my account since 2021 because his credit had dipped and I had co-signed. A country club membership in his name that I had bought him as a career gift when he made partner at his firm, $4,200 a year. The housekeeper who came twice a week, $250 every week, deducted from my checking account. Imani's private school tuition, $22,000 a year, which I paid because Vanessa had told me it would be an investment in my granddaughter's future. I added it up. I added it all up. Then I looked at the total, and I thought about what 14 seconds of silence sounds like when it comes from your own child. I called Calvin back. Cancel the lease on the BMW, I told him. Cancel the insurance on the house. Cancel the country club. Cancel the housekeeper. And Calvin, pull Vanessa's access from that savings account tonight. Tonight. Done, he said. And Dorothy? He paused. I located a buyer, a developer named Howard Graves. He does adaptive reuse projects in the Houston suburbs. He's been watching the Sugarland market. Calvin told me the number. $720,000, I said. Calvin, tell Mr. Graves he has a deal. The morning of December 28th, I drove to Sugarland one last time. Patricia and James were already there when I arrived, along with 2 men from a property security company that James had used before. The locksmith had come at 7. By 8 o'clock, the locks on every door had been changed. By 9, the security company had placed temporary fencing along the property line with posted notices. By 10, Calvin had filed the formal notice of breach and sale notification with the county clerk. At 11:15, my son called me. He was at work. He worked between Christmas and New Year's, when his firm was in a deal cycle. He had left the house that morning without knowing anything had changed. His first words were, Ma, why is my card declining? Good morning, Marcus, I said. The credit card you pay for. It just got declined at the parking garage. I canceled it this morning, I told him. A pause. Why? Because I'm no longer paying for it. I'm no longer paying for the BMW either. You should probably make arrangements. Ma, what is going on? I'm selling the house, Marcus. The silence that followed was different from Christmas Eve. That silence had been passive. This silence was the sound of something falling apart. You can't sell the house. We live there. You live in a property owned by the Collins Family Trust, I said. You violated the terms of that trust on Christmas Eve when you informed me through your wife that you intended to take legal action against me. Clause 7 is very clear. His voice went up. That was Vanessa talking. I didn't say I was going to sue you. I didn't say that. You stood in your kitchen and let your wife threaten me with a lawyer in front of her entire family, Marcus. You said nothing. Ma, please. Just wait. Let me come home. You won't be able to get in, I said. The locks were changed this morning. I drove away before he could call back. By noon on the 28th, Howard Graves had signed the purchase agreement. By 2 o'clock, Calvin had the wire transfer in escrow. By 4 o'clock, a moving truck I had arranged had collected the items from the house that belonged to me specifically. Raymond's desk, my mother's cedar chest, the Wedgwood china, Imani's artwork that I had framed and hung in the upstairs hallway, and the photo albums going back to Raymond's parents. Everything else, per Texas property law, was left in the possession of the new owner. Howard Graves had been very understanding about the timeline. He had seen situations like this before, he told Calvin. My son arrived at the house at 4:47. I know because Patricia was parked down the street watching and she called me. He's here, she said. He's trying his key. He's going around back. He's on the phone now. He's sitting down on the front steps. Is his car there? No. His wife's Range Rover is not there. It wouldn't be. I had also called the finance company that held the lease on Vanessa's car, the lease that had my name as a co-signer, because her own credit history had certain complications I had overlooked when I added myself to the paperwork 2 years ago. I had notified them that I was withdrawing as co-signer effective immediately, which triggered a default review. Vanessa's car had been picked up at 9 that morning from a shopping center on Highway 90 where she had stopped for coffee. Patricia said my son sat on those steps for 2 hours. She said he didn't yell. He didn't pound on the door. He just sat there with his elbows on his knees and his head down. And eventually the security guard walked over and handed him a folder with the formal notice of sale and the name of the new property owner. He called me 7 times between 5 and 8 that evening. I answered on the 7th call. Where are we supposed to go? He said. His voice was quiet, not angry, just gutted. I don't know, Marcus. Imani is with Vanessa's mother. She doesn't understand what's happening. I know. Ma, I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. You made a choice, I told him. On Christmas Eve, in your kitchen, when your wife threatened to take me to court over my own property, you made a choice to say nothing. 14 seconds is long enough to say something. You chose not to. He didn't answer. There's something else you should know, I said. I told him about the savings account. I told him about the $41,000. I told him about the ATM withdrawals in Sugarland, the increments, the 2 years. He was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Marcus, I didn't know, he said. His voice was barely a sound. Ma, I swear to you, I did not know. I believe you, I told him. But you should also know that Calvin has filed a report with the Houston Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. There will be an investigation. I cannot stop that process, and I would not stop it if I could. He asked about Imani. I told him that Imani would always have a grandmother. That was not in question. But Imani's education fund had been stolen, and that had consequences for everyone involved. He started crying. I had not heard my son cry since Raymond's funeral. He was 9 years old then, standing at the graveside in a suit that was slightly too big. Holding my hand so hard my fingers went numb. I did not hang up. I stayed on the line and let him cry. When he was finished, I said, Marcus, I love you. That has never changed, and it never will. But love is not a blank check. It is not unconditional financing. I have been writing you blank checks since you were in college, and I am done. If you want your mother back in your life, you start from the ground floor, and you build your way up like every other man in this city who doesn't have a trust fund behind him. He said, I don't know how to do that. Yes, you do, I told him. You watched your father do it. You watched me do it. You know exactly how. I hung up. 2 weeks later, a detective named Sandra Okafor from Houston's Financial Crimes Unit called me. She had a warm, professional voice, and she got directly to the point. She told me that Vanessa had been questioned, and that in the course of the investigation they had found additional matters that went beyond my account. She told me that Vanessa had been operating a small-scale fraud for longer than 2 years, and that my account had not been the only one. There were 2 other family members, both on her husband's side, who had experienced similar unexplained withdrawals. She's been charged with 4 counts of felony theft and 1 count of identity theft, Detective Okafor said. She'll be arraigned next week. I thanked her. I wrote down the case number. I put the paper in my files. Marcus called me that night. Vanessa had moved in with her mother after he confronted her. He was staying in a corporate apartment his firm used for out-of-town clients. He was sleeping on a pull-out couch. He sounded like a man who had stopped drinking, not because anyone had asked him to, but because the thing that had made drinking feel necessary had finally broken open. I need to understand something, he told me. He was careful with his words, in a way he had never been before. Not careful the way Vanessa was careful, rehearsed and strategic, but careful the way a person is when they are genuinely afraid of saying the wrong thing. Why did you keep doing it? All those years, the house, the lease, the club membership. You knew I wasn't earning those things. Why did you keep handing them to me? I thought about that for a long time before I answered. Because I was afraid, I told him. Your father died young and you were 9 years old, and I spent the next 20 years trying to make sure you never felt the kind of fear that I felt standing at that graveside. I was trying to protect you from hard things, and instead I taught you that hard things would always go away if you waited long enough. That was my failure, Marcus. Not yours alone. Mine. He didn't say anything for a moment. I'm going to a therapist, he said. I started this week, and I called Imani last night. I told her that Daddy made some mistakes and that I was working on being better. She told me she still loves me. She said, Grandma says people can always choose to be better. I smiled at that. I did tell her that, I said. He asked if he could come to dinner sometime. Not soon, he said. Whenever I was ready, I said, let's start with a phone call every Sunday. We'll go from there. That was the ground floor. 8 months later, Imani and I drove to a community center in the 3rd Ward on a Saturday afternoon. The center had been my school for 35 years, rebuilt with a grant and a lot of volunteer labor, and renamed in 2019. I still ran the after-school reading program there every other week. I had been doing it since I retired because you don't teach children for 35 years and then just stop caring about what happens to them. Imani sat in the front row and listened to me read to 12 children between the ages of 6 and 9. She helped pass out the books. She helped the younger ones find their pages. She was 9 now, patient and serious in the way she had always been, with her grandmother's hands and her grandfather's eyes. On the drive home, she asked me, Grandma, is Daddy going to be okay? I kept my eyes on the road. Your father is working very hard to be okay, I told her. That's all any of us can do. Work hard at it. She thought about that. She asked, Are you okay, Grandma? I smiled at the road. I am better than okay, baby. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at Raymond's table with a cup of tea and my journal. I had started keeping a journal the year Raymond died. When a grief counselor told me to write down what I was feeling because otherwise it would sit inside me like stone, I had kept the habit. 27 years of journals, spiral bound, stored in a box in my closet. I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. I wrote, Today I watched my granddaughter help 9-year-olds find their pages in a book. She did not need to be asked. She just saw a need and filled it. That is who she is. That is who she will always be. regardless of what happens with her parents or her money, or any of the things that adults spend their whole lives worrying about. Children show you what character looks like before the world gets to it. Watch them closely while you can. I put the pen down and looked around my apartment. It was small. The furniture was old and familiar. The carpet had a worn path from the door to the kitchen because I had walked that path 10,000 times. I had bought this apartment 18 years ago for $160,000. Cash. Because I did not trust loans, and I did not trust the idea of anyone being able to take my home from me for non-payment. I had been right not to trust it. This was the home I had chosen for myself, not the one I had bought for someone else. Mine. I thought about the house on Sycamore Ridge, the $480,000, the 17 years of property taxes and insurance premiums and repair bills. I thought about the $720,000 I had received from Howard Graves. I thought about what my accountant called a net gain and what I called something else entirely. I thought about the $41,000 that Detective Okafor had told me would be recovered through the civil restitution process, which could take years, and which I had decided I would put entirely into Imani's education fund the moment it arrived, not $1 less. I thought about Marcus on that front step with his elbows on his knees, and I thought about the 9-year-old boy at the graveside holding my hand. Those two people were the same person. I had never stopped believing that. Sunday calls had become Sunday dinners by March. Neutral ground. A restaurant in Midtown. Nothing fancy. Marcus always arrived before me and stood up when I walked in, the way Raymond had taught him to stand when a woman enters a room. I had not seen him do that since he was a teenager. Small things tell you everything. He was still in the corporate apartment. His firm had extended the arrangement while his divorce finalized. He had taken on a second client load, working more hours than he had in years, and he said it felt different now. He said it felt like his. He told me in April that his therapist had asked him to write a letter to me. Not to send necessarily, just to write. He said he had written it, and then he had decided to send it anyway, because he didn't want to be the kind of man who only did the required minimum. The letter was 4 handwritten pages. I read it twice at my kitchen table, and then I folded it carefully and put it in the cedar chest next to Raymond's letters from before we were married. That was where I kept things that mattered. His therapist's name was Dr. Bernard. And Marcus said he had told Dr. Bernard something in their 3rd session that he wanted me to know about. He had said, "I spent 30 years watching my mother sacrifice everything for me, and I never once asked myself what it cost her. I just assumed the sacrifice was automatic. I assumed that was just what she was for." Dr. Bernard had asked him where that assumption came from. He said he thought about it for a week before he could answer. He told me the answer over dinner at a restaurant on Westheimer in late April, a Tuesday night. Rain coming down outside. The two of us at a corner table with our coats still damp from the walk from the parking lot. "I assumed it," he said, "because you never let me see the cost. You protected me from it. Every time you worked a double shift, you came home and made dinner and didn't mention the shift. Every time money was tight, you figured it out before it became visible. You were so good at absorbing the hard things that I stopped believing hard things existed for you." I looked at my son across the table. "I know," I told him. "I know that's what I did. So it wasn't just me being ungrateful," he said. "I mean, I was. But I was also working from a picture of you that you had painted on purpose. A picture where you didn't need anything. Where you were just there." I nodded. "Your father was the same way," I told him. "He was the strongest man I ever knew, and he died at 51, and I never even knew his blood pressure was high, because he didn't want me to worry. Strong people pay a price for being strong. The price is that nobody sees what it costs." Marcus reached across the table and put his hand over mine. He said, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure Imani knows the cost of everything, not to burden her, but so she understands that nothing is free. Not love, not protection, not sacrifice. That's all I ever wanted to teach you," I told him. The rain came down outside and we finished our dinner and he paid the check without me having to say a word. On the drive home, I thought about a proverb my mother used to say. A woman who had picked cotton as a girl and raised 4 children in a 2-bedroom house and sent every one of them to college. She used to say, "Give a hungry man a fish and he eats today, but never let a man forget he was hungry or he'll forget what it cost someone to feed him." I had fed my son for 30 years and never let him see the hunger. That was over. I got home and made my tea and sat at Raymond's table. And I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly. Quieter than that. More like the feeling of a room after a storm has passed, when the air is clean and the light is different and everything that was loose has finally settled. My name is Dorothy May Collins. I am 66 years old. I gave 35 years to other people's children. And I gave even more to my own. And I made mistakes in both directions, giving too much in the wrong ways and not enough of the right things. I do not regret the giving. I regret the way I did it, quietly, invisibly, until silence became the language we spoke to each other in my family. I am speaking plainly now. It took me 66 years to learn how. The lesson is this. You can love someone and still refuse to protect them from the consequences of their own choices. Those two things are not opposites. They are, in fact, the same thing. The deepest love I have ever shown my son was not the house, not the lease, not the country club membership. It was the 14 seconds on Christmas Eve when I stood up from that floor and walked out. It was the phone calls I didn't answer. It was the door I had rekeyed before he got home from work. It was letting him sit on those front steps and feel the full weight of what he had chosen. Some lessons can only be learned from the outside. My son needed to stand outside a locked door to understand what it meant that the door had always been open. It's open again now, on my terms, with boundaries, with honesty. And when he came to Sunday dinner last month and brought Imani and stood up when I walked into the restaurant, I saw Raymond's eyes in his face again. The way they looked before the years of easy living softened them into something else. Clear and direct and warm. I sat down across from him and I thought, there you are. There is the man I raised. It only cost everything to find him, and I would do it again.